So today we're taking a look at how to print product labels from noloco using our trusted Dymo label writer 450, but it gets better. Also going to be taking a look at how to print remotely using printnode.com regular things like this spec sheet, for instance, using a regular printer that could be technically at the corner of the room or in a whole other country. As long as it's connected to the internet, we can print. So without any further ado, let's get started. So we're going to start things off with a very quick demo, as we usually do. So here I have a noloco app that basically deals with checking in and checking out of various pieces of equipment. You can imagine that this is a very typical scenario that we get faced with. And yeah, all you have to do is like open up an item, for instance, this one, and print label. After a couple of seconds, there we go, we will get our label. And you can go ahead and stick this onto one of your devices. And if you want to print another one, just print label again. Now, of course, it gets better because we can also print the spec sheet. And this is going to send the bigger version of the PDF for that item into our main printer. Now, the most important thing to notice here is that essentially the printer could be absolutely anywhere. It is connected to the cloud and we're printing via the cloud. Here we go. But it has got the movements, the people that we've actually given this item to, and this is Harry mainly. So yeah, it looks great. Now let's take a look at how to set the whole thing. Now, before we go any further, I would like to say that we appreciate absolutely every single person who watches this channel, and we're trying to reach a goal of 3,000 subscribers by the end of this year, 2024, December 31st, 2024. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is kind of like a lame target, but we're a small channel. So let's up the ante. If we get 10,000 subscribers by that date, I will say bye-bye to my most precious possession, my beard. So yes, sometimes we have to kill our darlings for the greater good. Although I know I am going to severely regret this. Anyway, back to the video. Now, before we get too into deep with this whole automation process, I want to give you 3 quick tips before we get started. Tip number 1, and that is to actually go ahead and watch some of the previous videos we've done for generating labels using Stencil. I'll link the videos down in the description below. Make sure you watch that because some elements of what we're going to be doing today won't make sense unless you watch those old videos. Tip number 2, and that is to go ahead and watch some of the videos that we did on Documint, because generating the spec sheet means that you need to know how to use Documint. So again, I've linked those videos down below. Check them out before proceeding. If you know what you're doing, that's fine, but if you don't, definitely check out those videos. Tip number 3, and that is about noloco. It's such an awesome tool, and it can do so many things. If you don't know what you're doing, go ahead and check out some of the basics videos that we've done in the past. I've linked one down in the description below that should help you get started with noloco. Okay, now let's go and see how to set this whole thing up. Okay, first things first, the database. Now, it couldn't get really any easier with this. All we have to do is just basically create just a few tables: items, staff members, and ledger. Now, there's more fields behind the scenes, but in order to pull off label printing, all you will really need is a list of items, just like I've done here. Just a concatenation, for instance, of the brand and model. We have the item ID, which is just the record ID, but we're doing a little bit of chopping, slicing, and dicing of it. Then we have the brand, just a simple drop down, the model, text. Then we have over here next status, which is essentially it's like a dynamic field that tells us what the next status of the item should be, whether the next thing that we need to print is checked in or checked out. Then we have a list of images for that particular item. We have the stencil ID and an NLC update field, both of which are just simple text fields. We also have staff members, again, Tom, Dick, and Harry. We've got ledger, just a link back to the ledger where we're tracking the movements of each item. And I'm gonna do a whole separate video on how the check-in, check-out system works because it's really interesting and it's achievable to do it without much automation, which is really nice. You don't even need make for it, believe it or not. Yeah, the ledger is kind of straightforward. All we have is just a concatenation of the item, staff, and quantity, link back to the item, a lookup of the item ID, link to staff, the name of that staff member, the direction, like what was the direction of the movement, was it checked out, and of course when, and some notes. So very straightforward design for the database. All right, so it's time for the automation. Now, it's actually a fairly straightforward thing to build. Like I said in my little tips, check out those videos on Stencil and Documint. You're gonna really need them. Most likely you're not a make newbie, so you probably would have done a few projects by now. So I'm not gonna go into the spiel of, oh, you've never seen make before. This is a fairly straightforward automation, but I feel like you need to know what you're doing. So in general, to understand how this whole thing works, it's also important to understand how noloco behaves, because we're printing labels from there, and it is the thing that triggers this automation all the time. Typically on this channel, we trigger things from Airtable, but this is not the case today. And the reason why, it's because we care about speed. If I was to trigger things from Airtable, that would take a few seconds extra, and noloco tends to trigger webhooks incredibly fast. Literally, the moment you press it, sometimes I don't even have time to jump back into my make automation to see what's going on. It has already triggered, it's already in progress. It is that quick. Essentially, what we have first and foremost in our automation is this part over here, this top part. Now, this top part mainly deals with the creation of the label a design within Stencil. And we're using exactly the same design that we used in our Stencil video, so go ahead and check that out. Our first step here is to create the PDF. First and foremost, we have a router where REQ does not exist. In order to kind of like fully understand this, let's jump into noloco to see how things work. So when we are in items and we want to create a new item, this will trigger an automation that will essentially go ahead and create that label. It will land in this webhook and will take this path up here. You see here, REQ does not exist. This basically means that over here, I have an automation in noloco that triggers when a record is created, and the first step that it takes is to trigger this webhook. But you see, there's no reference to REQ. That is because the other two automations that I've got, print label and print spec sheet, and I should be saying workflows, these actually contain an extra little parameter in the URL. You see, I'm adding a question mark, REQ spec sheet, label, question mark, REQ label. Basically, these workflows exist, and I'm adding this question mark REQ because I want to be able to direct it. I want the command of printing a label or printing a spec sheet to be to carry over in my payload when I'm actually triggering that webhook. By the same token, when REQ is missing, that basically means that the item has just been created. And during that creation process, we can just quietly go ahead and create the PDF. And you can see here I'm saying stencil ID is missing from my database, and I'm going ahead and I'm creating my stencil design just like we did in the previous video, and we push that stencil ID to our list of items, and we're also saying generating label. And finally, we have this little noloco module here. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to refresh noloco very quickly. So all I'm doing is I'm opening up the collection of items and I'm printing a now tag, basically like a little timestamp inside of my NLC update field. Remember the one that I showed you earlier? So basically you can trigger noloco to update its own sort of memory just by printing something via a make module. It's not super necessary at the moment, but it's nice to make sure that noloco's own memory is updated as you go along. So that takes care of the creation of the label. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Alex, but how does it work when it comes to the spec sheet? Glad you asked. Now, the spec sheet is a little bit easier in that sense because all we have to do is we have to just simply rely on our spec sheet, and do check out Documint videos. The spec sheet over here that I've created is actually quite straightforward. We have like some header stuff over here, very basic. We have a QR code, and then we have the loop over here of the date, user, action, and notes and comments. So very straightforward spec sheet PDF design. All you really have to do is to make sure that first and foremost, you get the array of the log. So the way that I'm doing it here is the item ID is being that little thing that I search by inside of my ledger. I'm also sorting it by the created on field because I want to make sure that the newest is at the top and the oldest is at the bottom. From there, I'm essentially creating a log of actions. There we go, this one. I'm mapping in the date, the user, the action, and the notes. And all I have to do from there is to just map it inside of Documint. Now you can see here that I've got two different paths. The first path deals with if the array is empty or not. So in this case, not equal to 0, that means that the array actually has something. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have if the array actually is equal to 0. In other words, if we don't have anything. I then go ahead and proceed to kind of like map absolutely everything in, the QR code, the item, brand, and so forth, and the log of actions. And on the other end, no log of actions. It's just a safer, easier way. You could probably do it with like an ignore function or something like that, but I just wanted it to be as simple as possible, so a router is completely fine. From there, I'm updating Airtable with like some, what am I actually doing? Yeah, I'm just basically saying that I'm generating the label. I'm adding the spec sheets inside just in case we want to see the PDF file. I'm also sending this to print node. So in this case, I'm just basically mapping it. I'm choosing the right printer to begin with. And from there, we have the PDF URI. I'm mapping the PDF URL that I get from Documint. Yeah, basically that's it. Nothing else. That's the spec sheet. We also have the label, of course, is a little bit of an easier job because over here in this end where we have the router, we're just saying that rec exists. In this router, we are basically determining what kind of requests we're dealing with. Is it a spec sheet? Is it a label? But when it comes to the label, I'm also saying, hey, the stencil ID needs to exist because I need it later. It's not just, oh, I want a label printed. No, I also need to have the stencil ID present. Over here in stencil, I'm just basically getting the PDF. I'm performing an API call. I get the PDF based on the stencil ID. That gives me the URL that I can now use inside of print node. Choose your printer, PDF URI, PDF URL. So yeah, that's it. Basically, that's the whole automation. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this quick little automation. Hopefully you've found it interesting to be able to print labels from noloco. Leave a comment down below if you want me to do more of these kinds of videos where we're involving the Internet of Things, so to speak, and I'll see what I can do. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.